Well, welcome back to the Northborough Church of Christ YouTube channel, and we really do appreciate everybody that's logged on and viewed these sermons. Hopefully they've been an encouragement to you. I know Adam and I, we pray earnestly that they would be and that God would be pleased with them. So God bless you and thank you for tuning in. Today we talk about Genesis 34 and 35, and what we see in those two chapters, in Chapter 34, we see a scandal. That's the title of today's message, Scandals. Throughout history, there's been numerous scandals. You can recall Watergate. And President Nixon, there was a scandal, right? And he was trying to, from what I understand, he was trying to hide information about himself and trying to steal and wiretap the Democratic Party's convention or building. You might recall Spygate if you're a sports fan, and it's so easy to pick on the Patriots, isn't it, nowadays? But Spygate was a scandal in the football world. Even recently, just recently in New York City, Carl Lentz, a famous preacher, pastor for the Hillsong Church in New York City, was just fired because he was committing adultery against his wife. It's a huge scandal. And there's common themes throughout these scandals that we witness in history and in humanity. And there's also a common theme in Genesis 34 of this scandal that we see concerning Dinah and Shechem. But the scandal doesn't stop with what Shechem did to Dinah. It also involves Simeon and Levi and Jacob. And so what we'd like to do today is just to kind of uncover what's beneath these scandals, what mindset, what's being harbored in the people's hearts when the scandal is perpetrated. And how can we avoid the biggest scandal of all? As Christians, we don't want to be involved in any type of scandal. But we especially don't want to be involved in the scandal which gives God a bad name. To go out and profess Christ to other people and then give those same people a reason to mock or make fun of God. And we see these scandals unfold in Genesis 34. The very first verse says this: Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Now keep that in mind. Moses tells us specifically that Dinah is the daughter of Leah. We're going to come back to that. When Shechem the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he took her and lay with her by force. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the girl and spoke tenderly to her. Now right off we see that Dinah was taken by force, and you may see other commentaries that try to sidestep the issue and say, well, it wasn't rape. It was rape. Shechem forced her to do something because he so desired her. And that it almost sounds like the love that he showed, or the love that he had for Dinah, was based off of physical attraction. And there's nothing wrong with being attracted to somebody, but sometimes what happens is we can confuse lust with love. It says that Shechem saw Dinah and took her by force and lay with her. And then the love came. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, Get me this young girl for a wife. Now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came in. Now we're going to go a little bit further here, but I want to stop here and emphasize the point that we don't want to confuse lust with love. In our modern culture today, I think a lot of what we call love in our culture is confused with lust. But remember this, that biblical love, godly love, never leads to sin. Jesus was asked, what are the greatest commandments? And Jesus says, love the Lord thy God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And he says, if you do this, you fulfilled the law. Love never leads to sin. So you think about the implications of that. You think about when you're in a relationship with somebody that you're not married to, and you say you love them. Do you do things in that relationship that are sinful? Because love, biblical love, never leads to sin. And so I question, just how much did Shechem love Dinah? If you want to turn to 1 Corinthians 13, we have an example of it, and it's a familiar passage, right? 1 Corinthians 13. It describes love for us, starting in verse 4. Love is patient, love is kind, and is not jealous. Love does not brag and is not arrogant. It does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness. See, the biblical definition of love never leads, that type of love never leads to sinful behavior, but lust may. Lust may sometimes lead to sin. In James chapter 1, it's spelled out for us. It's spelled out like this in chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial. For once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil. God's not going to tempt you to sin. God may test us, but the tests that God gives us is never so that we can sin. It's so that we can grow. God's not going to tempt us to do evil. God can't be tempted by evil. But each one is tempted when he is carried away and enticed by his own lusts. See, if we're following the pattern of biblical love in our life, that love will never lead to sin, but lust will. And you want to know why there's a scandal in Israel? Because Shechem lusted after Dinah, and he didn't control himself. There's a scandal. So don't confuse biblical love with lust. There is a huge difference. And as we go on, notice back in Genesis 34, what Shechem does. He says that he's deeply attracted to Dinah. He says that he loves her. He asks his dad, Hamor, to go and talk to Jacob so that he can marry her. But notice what he doesn't say. In verse 6, then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing ought not to be done. It's a scandal. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. And to marry with us, give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. Thus you shall live with us, and the land shall be open before you. Live and trade in it, and acquire property in it. And notice what Shechem says. Not only, at least in my mind, not only did he confuse love with lust, but he was also blinded by pride. And notice what he says. Shechem, in verse 11, also said to her father and to her brothers, if I find favor in your sight. What an arrogant thing to say. He's just taken their daughter and sister and has forcibly had sex with her. Now, he's not Israel. He's not in Israel. He is a Hivite. It's a disgraceful thing to do. He's brought shame upon Israel, Jacob. And he says, and he has the audacity to ask, if I have found favor in your sight, how in the world would he find favor in their sight? He couldn't apologize. Maybe he didn't think he had done anything wrong. You see, arrogance, pride blinds us. Pride blinds us. And Proverbs chapter 16, it says, haughtiness comes before a fall. See, we can't see the fall that we are approaching because we're so blinded by our pride. But we will fall. It will happen. Because pride blinds us. In John chapter 9, Jesus said it this way. And he had just healed a man who's been born blind from birth. And the Pharisees are going back and forth with him and then also with his parents, you might recall. And they asked his parents, is this your son? Yes. And how is it that he is now can see even though he's been born blind? And his parents say, well, he's of age. You go ask him yourself. And so they go back to him. And he says, this is an amazing thing that once I was blind, but now I see. And whether or not this man is a sinner, talking about Jesus, I don't know. And so eventually what happens is they kick him out of the synagogue. They basically said, you're no longer, if you will, a Christian. You can no longer practice religion here. You've been excommunicated. And Jesus caught wind of it. And this is what Jesus said to the man, starting in verse 35. Jesus heard that they had put him out, and finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Notice how he worshiped him. And Jesus didn't deny him worship. Jesus was God. Jesus is God. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, we are not blind too, are we? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. In other words, if you recognize your need, if you recognize that you're blind, you come to Christ. If you recognize you need help, you come to Christ. But he says, but since you say we see, you see the pride there? They don't need Jesus. They can see. They're so full of pride and arrogance and self-righteousness that they don't even recognize that while they're saying they see, they're blind. They're blind to the fact that they need the very person who is standing in front of them. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're blind, or maybe you say, I can see, I have no need of Jesus. Blind because of their pride. And I sense that in Shechem. It seems to me like he gets his way. His father didn't deny him the request. Even though in my mind, how could his father not know what's occurred? The same is true with Jacob, we see. Jacob says nothing. Jacob knows what's happened. He knows it's a disgraceful thing. He has to know. And yet he's not the one that says anything through all this until the end of the chapter. Simeon and Levi step up. It says that when they heard about it, they came in from the field, and now they're engaging in this bargain for their daughter, or for their sister, Jacob's daughter. But never mind all that. I mean, what do you think Dinah thinks about all this? Dinah comes and goes. She's introduced in the beginning of the chapter, and we don't hear another word from her. The Simeon and Levi scandal was anger, which turned into fury and turned into wrath. They had a right to be angry. Their sister had been defiled, dishonored. But their anger went beyond justice. Their anger went beyond what was right. And brothers and sisters, if we're not careful, we can be prone to anger. And sometimes our anger is justified, but what we do with that anger, we need to be careful. See, Shechem's scandal was that he thought lust was love. And pride set in, and he didn't even apologize. He didn't even recognize the wrong. He didn't even acknowledge it. If I found favor, he says, as a matter of fact. The Simeon and Levi scandal, we pick it up. We've already read it, but we'll just read it again in chapter 34. They come in from the field in verse 7. Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved. And so they get wind of this news that their sister's been defiled. They come in from the field and they're upset. And they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing ought not to be done. You see the emphasis that Moses puts on here? This man's a Hivite, and he should not be sleeping with a daughter of Israel. That thing should not be done. And brothers and sisters, let that be a warning for us. You want to put one foot in the world and one foot in the church? That's a dangerous place to be. And Dinah's not at fault for what happened to her. Shechem is. But maybe she could have avoided some pain and suffering if she had just stuck with her own. We can't intermingle with the world, brothers and sisters. If we've claimed our stake, that we are Christians and we are now walking in newness of life, then let that be who we are. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage." And then he talks about, intermarry with us. We'll give you our daughters. You give your daughters to us. Go and have some of the land, right? Acquire property. And then Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers in verse 11, "If I find favor in your sight, then I will give whatever you say to me. Ask me ever so much bridal payment and gift, and I will give according as you say to me. But give me the girl in marriage." Now, this should have taken place before he defiled her. And even if he hadn't done what he done, he shouldn't have married or intermingled. But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit. I wonder where they got that from. Because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And so everything that's about to be spoken, they have come up with this scheme. It's premeditated. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, if you will become like us, and that every male of you be circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us to be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and go. Part of the scandal that befalls Simeon and Levi is their anger. But another part of it too is to assume that there's only one thing that makes them different from their surrounding people. Circumcision wasn't the only thing that made them separate. And brothers and sisters, don't ever think that it's just one thing that separates us from the world. But their anger got the best of them. And in that moment, they predetermined, they premeditated a plan to not only do away with Shechem and Hamor, but all of the Hivites that were living in that land. Now their words seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, verse 18, Hamor's son. The young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, now, it's a little play on words, but here we have like a Shechem gate, right? We say Watergate, Spygate, and they're at the gate, Shechem gate. He came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are friendly with us. Therefore let them live in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. Only on this condition will the men consent to us to live with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. And see here, Shechem's not being honest. He hasn't told them why they have to be circumcised, because he wants Dinah. That's nowhere involved in here. So we see the kind of character that this Shechem has. And so he says in verse 23, will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will live with us. And all who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and to his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out the gate of the city. So they did what they asked. Now it came about on the third day, in verse 25, when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. Oh, that's justice, right? That's what they deserve. That's what they get. They shouldn't have done what they did, but there's only one person that did what they did. Shechem. And brothers and sisters, this leads to a huge scandal, a huge disgrace. And Jacob even recognizes it, and he acknowledges it. If they wanted justice, they should have done it the right way and counseled God. God is nowhere mentioned in Genesis 34. The scriptures tell us that the wrath of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. In James chapter 1 again, if you want to go back there with me, if you're following along, James 1 starting in verse 19, this you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. You say, well, doesn't God get angry? Yes, he does. Haven't I seen the anger of God displayed before? Yes, I have. All we have to do is look at the record of the flood. Look what is the potential of those who do not turn to Christ in hell. The scriptures tell us that God is slow to anger. It is not an impulsive, violent, aggressive response to a wrong done to him. And brothers and sisters, again, Simeon and Levi, they should have been angry. But to allow that anger to push them towards the actions they took was wrong. They lied, they were deceitful, so that they can go and kill every male in the city. There's only one man that defiled them. Psalm 145 and verse 8 says this about God. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and great in loving kindness. Just think about how patient God is. That any time we see anger displayed by God, that it is righteous, that it has no sin in it, and that it just might have taken him a long time to get there. Simeon and Levi, they weren't slow to anger. Their anger did not achieve the righteousness of God. It was a scandal. It brought disgrace upon the people of Israel. And brothers and sisters, have you ever been there? Has your anger ever caused a scandal? You see, that's not the way a Christian should be behaving. Someone that claims to be a child of God can't allow the Holy Spirit to control them in that moment. It's difficult, isn't it? I know. Anger's fury, it also destroys self-control. So that not only does the wrath of man not achieve the righteousness of God, and Simeon and Levi, they did not achieve the righteousness of God, but it destroys self-control. They had an opportunity, and they didn't take it. Instead, they went with their gut. They went with what their emotions told them. In Proverbs 16:23, says this: the heart of the wise instructs his mouth and adds persuasiveness to his lips. The heart of the wise instructs his mouth and adds persuasiveness to his lips. What are we saying? Wisdom. Wisdom in those moments. James tells us, if anyone lacks wisdom, to ask God, who gives to all generously without any doubting. So Simeon and Levi allowed their anger to erase any type of wisdom that they could have acted with. You say, well, they were pretty wise. I mean, after all, they did devise a plan that was pretty cunning to where they could take advantage of the injured males of the city. After 3 days of being circumcised, that would be pretty painful. And they took advantage of that. Weren't they wise? No. They were evil. It was an evil thing to do. Jacob recognizes that, but then also, if you recall, when Jacob is in Egypt and he's about to die, he blesses his sons. And this is what he says. If you just give me 1 second so I can find it. In verse 21 of Genesis 48, Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. I give you one portion more than your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow." And then he goes on to bless Reuben, who's the firstborn. And then he says this about Simeon and Levi in verse 5 of chapter 49. "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Yet let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen." So Jacob is about to die in Egypt, and he recalls this moment. And he says, "Let not my counsel be with theirs." Because wisdom it opens up the channel of self-control. The Holy Spirit in our lives, brothers and sisters, should enable us to overcome any aggression and violent reaction and response we may have to an injustice done to us. We need to avoid those types of scandals, those types of disgraceful acts that bring shame not only upon us, but upon the God that we claim to serve. So Shechem's scandal. He was confusing lust for love, and he took Dinah by force. A Hivite with an Israelite. That's a scandal. He should have never done that. And he couldn't apologize. His pride blinded him. You take a look at Simeon and Levi. Their anger got the best of them. And the wrath of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Not ever. Slow to speak and slow to anger. Wise. But then you take a look at Jacob. You say, well, how is Jacob at fault here? It's an interesting word in Matthew chapter 18. But before we turn there, I just want to read his response as Simeon and Levi come back from killing all of the males and then looting the city and taking all of the women and the children and the livestock. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city. This is Genesis 34:27. Because they had defiled their sister, they took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys and that which was in the city and that which was in the field. Well, that's justice. And they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister as a harlot?" Jacob's right. They have brought shame upon him. What happened to Dinah was awful. It should have never happened. But what they did in response should have never happened. And notice how we began the chapter. Moses records that Dinah is the daughter of who? Leah. And who was Jacob's favorite? Rebekah. And doesn't it make us wonder whether or not Jacob had that in mind? The weak-eyed sister's daughter. That Leah had to work 20 years for Rebekah, basically. And I worked the first 7 for your sister, not for you. And here we have his only daughter that her name is recorded, who is from Leah, not his favorite. Well, it kind of makes sense now why he doesn't speak up until he speaks up against Simeon and Levi. One of the biggest scandals that we could ever have is teaching someone to do or sin the same way that we sin. Jacob was a man of faith, no doubt, and with that faith, he had flaws. Matthew 18, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says this in verse 1. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a child to himself and set him before them and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you are converted and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever then humbles himself as this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone wrapped or hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." And that word stumble there is the Greek word where we get our word scandal. Scandalon. Brothers and sisters, one of the greatest scandals that we could ever perpetrate is to teach a little one to sin the same way that we are sinning. So don't dismiss your failures. Teach your children that you do fail. Don't be like Shechem was. If we sin, and our children or others who we love and care for in the church know, or anybody, let them know that you recognize that you failed. That will do so much good for your witness, believe it or not. It would do so much good for your relationship and my relationship with my kids, with those little ones. Favoritism definitely was involved with Jacob. We see that from the moment he saw Rebekah. He favored Rebekah over Leah, and we see that all the way into Egypt. He favors Joseph. So don't pick favorites, brothers and sisters, whether it's kids or whether it's candidates. You may have a favorite, but don't allow the favorite to cause you to not be objective. Everyone has flaws. And you look at someone and you favor them, and so you tend to overlook their flaws. When you look at somebody you don't like, and they could have the same flaw as the person you favor. But because you don't favor them, it's a fatal flaw, and you can't get beyond it. You have ceased to become objective. We should never have favorites when it comes to children. We should never have favorites when it comes to people. Love. Love everybody. And we also understand really quickly, notice what Jacob has here. He's got some inward issues. Because Simeon and Levi, they don't see eye to eye with Jacob. Because Jacob says, "Look, you've brought shame on me." And Simeon and Levi, they say, "Well, should he treat our sister like a harlot?" In other words, "Dad, you've done nothing." Jacob says to him, "Well, you've done too much." Notice what is allowed in the family by Jacob. Then God said to Jacob in verse 35, now here's the Lord. "Arise, go up to Bethel and live there and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." And Jacob's afraid again. Jacob is afraid that now these Hivites and these parasites, they're going to come and destroy his household, even though he knows that God has already told him that I am going to protect you. And Jacob's made a vow. You remember a couple of chapters back in Genesis 32, in Jacob's ladder. Jacob made a vow to God, and he says, if you're going to protect me, you're going to clothe me, you're going to feed me, and you're going to bring me back to where my father's house is, which is God is doing, then you will be my God. Remember that? And here we have this interesting passage. So Jacob came, verse 2. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods which are among you. See, we still have some idols here. We still have some idolatry going on. And Jacob made a vow to God, and he said, if you do this, then you will be my God. And yet he's allowing foreign gods in his own home. I wonder if Rebekah still has the foreign god, the idol that she took from Laban, her father. Maybe Rebekah was his favorite. And brothers and sisters, we made a vow to God when we were immersed into Christ that he would be our only God. We have to get rid of the idols. What a scandal. And you know how we get rid of them? We bury them. Put away the foreign gods which are among you. Purify yourselves and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel. And I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, and the rings which were in their ears. And Jacob hid them under the rock which was near Shechem. It's time to hide them away. Bury them. They're gone. And brothers and sisters, Jacob's scandal is that he still allowed foreign gods in his home because he had favorites. But he also was a man of faith. And when God came to him again and said, move from here, he moved. And if God is asking you to move from wherever it is that you need to move from, maybe there's a sin in your life that is causing a scandal, you need to move from it. Whether it's confusing lust with love, whether it's pride, whether it's anger that does not achieve the righteousness of God. Maybe it's favoritism. Maybe you do still have idols inside your home, inside your heart. Brothers and sisters, may we do away with scandals. May we be those who bury whatever it is that needs to be buried, so that we can give honor and praise to God's name, not disgrace. God bless.